Hi, welcome to another episode of Unconfused Israeli Real Estate. I'm here with Moshe Binyamini, my dearest friend. Hi, Moshe.
Hi, Maayan. How are you?
Everything is great. Today we're going to talk about Olim Chadashim and taxation.
Yes.
And a lot of numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Moshe, you're a lawyer.
That's
you
right.
represent people that lives across the world and they buy homes in Israel. Can you help us understand, if I make Aliyah, this is the first thing that people ask me. So if I make Aliyah, do I get redemption of tax or any benefits? Can you clarify it for us?
First of all, as an Israeli resident, when you buy a residential property, if it's your first property, you're exempt up to almost 2 million shekel. Okay, so your first bracket, it's zero tax, almost 2 million shekel. Above that, you have brackets. So your first bracket is 3.5%, then it's 5%, 6%, and 8%. It goes up. Depends on the property price, okay? This is for your first apartment, or we should even say more correctly, your loan apartment. It doesn't have to be your first.
The only apartment you hold in Israel.
Currently hold in Israel. It doesn't matter if you have another property in other countries or you have a commercial property in Israel. If it's your only residential property in Israel at the moment, you pay the purchase tax. Zero tax up to almost 2 million shekel. This is the first bracket for people that owns their first apartment. The other option to have the first bracket as a first apartment is to buy a second apartment and to declare it to the tax authorities as a replaceable apartment, which means you have to sell your previous apartment within 18 months from the second apartment that you buy. Okay, that's currently for today. So that's the tax brackets for Israelis, for Israeli residents. You have to be an Israeli resident to show that your life center is here in Israel, you have family, you have a work, you have income here, and besides that, to be most of the year to live in Israel. This is who's called an Israeli resident, without getting into too much details, okay? Now, if you're an Israeli resident and you want to buy a second or third or fourth apartment or even more as what we call an investor, you'll pay from the first shekel 8% as a purchase tax. In some prices, it even gets to 10%. And for foreign residents, it's the same tax. Even if it's your first apartment in Israel as a foreign resident, you'll pay 8% for the full price of the apartment. And for some amount, we will get to 10%. So this is Israeli first apartment, Israeli second, third, fourth apartment, and non-resident who buys apartment in Israel. By the way, same for companies, if it's an Israeli company or a foreign company. Now, we hear about Olim, right? We want to know what kind of a tax exemption Olim have.
So who is Oleh Chadash? Like, how to determine it? By law, you have to come here? What's the process of the Oleh?
So according to the tax office, everybody that wants to get the purchase tax exemption as an Oleh has to answer the definition of Oleh. It means it's got to be your first time in Israel, excluding times you've been a student here or just as a visit, as long as you haven't been a resident before. You start from the same bracket as an Israeli resident, and Oleh Chadash, they compare the first bracket. It means that up to almost 2 million shekel, you have full exemption. And for Israeli resident, the second bracket comes to around 2.5 million shekel, and you pay 3.5%, 3.5%, and later it goes up to 5%, and 6%, and 8%, and 10%. It depends on the property price. Now, what they did with the Olim from the last year is after the first bracket, which is zero tax, up to almost 2 million shekel, they made a flat 0.5% from the price between 2 million and 6 million. So there's a huge difference. Let's take an example for an apartment that's worth 3 million shekel. An Israeli resident that will buy his first apartment will pay 45,000 shekel as purchase tax for 3 million shekel worth apartment. The same exact apartment for Oleh Chadash, who is entitled to get the exemption, will pay only 5,000 shekel, 40,000 shekel difference. Okay?
That's very interesting. So it's worth it to make Aliyah if you buy an apartment, no?
Yeah, I can give you other examples for people that are clients of mine that bought apartments like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago before they did the reform in the tax, and they paid for, let's say, 7 million worth of apartment. They paid around 250,000 shekel purchase tax, and if they did it like a few months later, they would pay 100,000 shekel less.
And what happens if I buy an apartment and then I make Aliyah afterward? Do I get money back?
That's a great question because the period to use that exemption is either 1 year before you make Aliyah or 7 years after you make Aliyah. So you don't have to buy before you come here. You can do it even after. You have a 7-year or even an 8-year span, 1 year before and 7 years after.
Does it matter if I buy second-hand apartment or new apartment from a developer?
Yes, it matters because the 8-year span we just talked about is for second-hand apartments. If you buy a new apartment, you have even a bigger time span. You can even use it 3 years before making Aliyah because they want to encourage people and they know they want to come to Israel before the apartment will be ready.
Exactly.
Yeah, so right now from the last year, they give people the exemption from buying 3 years before the apartment is ready and making the Aliyah.
Because sometimes you buy an apartment and it takes 4 or 5 years until
Right.
it's ready. And then after that, you're not getting the permit to get in and live in the apartment.
Yeah.
So it makes it 6 or 7 years.
I know.
And okay,
No.
that's very good to know.
Another thing that changed in the last year is you don't have to live in the same apartment you buy. Because 1 year ago, to use the Olim exemption, you had to live in the apartment. They used to come and check if you live or you rent it to somebody else. And if it was somebody else there and you just live in a different apartment, they will take the exemption away. Right now, they change it and you don't have to live in the same apartment, you get the exemption.
So you can buy the apartment, get the exemption, and
You can rent it. Yeah, you can rent it. You don't have to live in the same apartment and you still get the exemption, which is great. By the way, when you buy a new apartment, and like we said, you have more than 1 year, you have 3 years before making Aliyah to use the exemption, you have to start the process once you buy it. And you have to show them you start the process, but you don't have to get the Oleh certificate in a year, like a second-hand apartment.
So what is the process? What do you mean 3 years before? Before what? I want to make Aliyah, I don't know, in a year. So what is the process? I go and ask for tax exemption before I even have property ready? How does it work?
First of all, you have to declare your purchase in 30 days once you sign the contract, okay? And they don't expect you to start the process right away, but you have
the process of the
of
Aliyah.
Aliyah, yeah. So it's technical to show them the documents that you already applied for Aliyah. And the second thing is to come and live in Israel. So eventually, if it's 1 year or 3 years, they're going to check if you already have all the documents of starting the Aliyah and eventually you have the Aliyah certificate and to see if you already live here.
So the question that I think all the people who's listening to us, all the thousands of people who's listening to us is, do you pay the tax and get the money back or you don't pay it at all or you pay half?
Well, first of all, when you buy an apartment or any property, you have to declare it in 30 days. The tax should be paid in 60 days. 2 months from signing the contract, you have to pay the tax. Now you pay it accordingly to your declaration. Whatever you or your lawyer declared, this is what you should pay. Later, when they check your file and your declaration, if you see you're right, they're going to approve it and close it. If they see you paid less, they're going to ask you to complete more and with interest. To pay how much,
with interest.
Yeah, how much they
So
think.
basically, sometimes if you have the money, you should pay all the money in advance and then get a refund. Does that come with interest?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I have a few clients that wasn't sure if they want to make Aliyah or not, and they paid as a non-resident. They paid the full 8% on the property, and then a year after, or 6 months after, or even sometimes 2 years after, they made Aliyah, and they request the money back, and just to change the exemption to Olim exemption, so they get the refund for the difference plus 5% interest.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah, that's a nice saving.
It's more than the bank gives you.
I know.
Some buyers, they buy in a trust. How do you handle it? Is it the same taxation or?
When you buy a property in Israel, eventually the right holder or the owner that will be registered is an individual person or a company. So if it's a trust, usually what we do is open a company, either an Israeli company or an LLC if it's an American company, that buys the apartment and uses the trust, the funds. Yeah. So in that case, you can't use the
redemption,
the exemption.
The exemption.
Yeah, because it's same as a company. So if people want to use the Oleh exemption, it has to be individual purchase on their name. So this is something they have to pre-check in their country, if it's the US or the UK or everywhere else, if they can transfer the money to their funds, to their individual accounts, and then to buy as an individual in Israel to use that exemption.
So basically, you really need to plan everything in ahead.
Everything you have to plan. Yeah, this is a huge saving if you know how to use it right and use the right people.
So if you're thinking about making aliyah or buying properties in Israel, you should basically consult with a lawyer when you have the thought and not while the process is going on.
Exactly, yeah. Because once you started, it's too late. You want to
Prepare.
You want to prepare and plan everything in advance, yeah.
What about when you sell the property? You have a property in Israel, you sell it, you need to pay taxes, right?
Right.
Which
So
kind of tax?
it's a betterment gain tax, or what we call mas shevach. And as an Israeli, once you sell an apartment, if it's your only residential apartment, you have full exemption up to 5 million shekel. And it has to be your only apartment or a replacement apartment to your only apartment. And again, we're talking only about residential properties, because commercial properties or properties outside of Israel doesn't count for that taxation. Now, for a lot of foreign residents, let's put Olim aside right now. A lot of people own apartments and they don't live in Israel. If it's Israelis that left Israel or non-resident that bought here a few years ago, and now
Or inherited.
Yeah, inherited apartments here. There's a lot of people that owns apartment in that way. So they should know there's also an option to get full exemption up to 5 million shekels, same as Israeli residents. But they should know it depends on a few terms, and the most important thing is that they don't own a residential
In their
property
own state.
in their own state. By the way, for every expense you have for the purchase process, if it's a lawyer, if it's a broker, the purchase tax itself, if you have any renovations, you should always keep the receipts. Because once you want to sell it, if you don't have a full exemption, you can use that to deduct your tax, your capital gain tax in the future. So that's a good tip for everybody. Keep your receipts.
What about when you sell a property in Israel? How much tax do you have to pay?
Well, it depends when you bought it, but in very, very general, you should pay 25% on the profit you made for a residential.
From the day you bought it until the day you...
No, not from the day you bought it. That's a good question. First of all, again, we're only talking about residential properties, because once we're talking about once we talk about commercial properties or even empty lands, it's all different, and you'll pay a much higher tax. So in very general, if you don't have full exemption, you'll pay 25% on the profit you made from the day you bought it until the day you sell the property for residential, okay? But if you bought it before 2014, so you take the whole time before that, and it's zero tax. So it's very important. I won't explain everything right now. How do you do the calculation? Because it's a bit complex. But in general, it's 25% on the profit. If you bought it before 2014, you have your exemption is going to be even bigger.
So a lot of exceptions. And if they have more questions, maybe they should ask a lawyer like yourself.
You have to. You can't do it by yourself. You have to consult with a lawyer.
I see some people, Israelis or other people, who's trying to go online and ask. Today it's ChatGPT, but in the past, all those calculation of tax on the internet, and it's always such a big problem for them, because you have to put all the expenses that you were having all those years, and the purchase taxes and everything. It has to be
right. You have to put you can use all expenses you had, or most of the expenses, if it's liens, purchase tax, broker, lawyer fee. And there's a lot of misinformation about it. I never recommend people just to ask online or to read online about how much tax they should pay, because it's very individual. Because usually,
very individual.
Yeah, doesn't matter if it's a purchase tax or capital gain tax. I always send a questionnaire to the client to see what his individual status is, and to see if he can apply for any exemption. And you can't just rely on any general questions or information that's online.
I know that sometimes you have mutual people that, or brothers, siblings, cousins, and they all have a mutual ownership in the property, and each of them have their own exemption and their own taxation, right?
Right, because in Israel, individual taxation is only for
your own family.
Your own close family. If it's you and your wife or your spouse and kids up to 18, And besides that, if it's brothers or parents or cousins, everyone is taxed individually. Doesn't matter if it's purchase tax or capital gain tax when they sell. So let's say just this week I have a house that 4 brothers inherited and sold it, and they didn't get the inheritance exemption. So you have to do individual tax to each one of them. It depends if they have other apartments or if it's their only apartment. If any one of them add separate expenses or not, you can use. So it's very individual. You can just make.
It sounds very
complicated.
Complicated,
yeah. It is.
Yeah. So before we end this episode, can you give us like a summary of everything we were talking about?
Right. So first of all, you don't have to remember everything I just said about the taxation. Hire a lawyer or a tax advisor that can help you and can tell you exactly how much tax you need to pay before making the step of purchasing a property or selling a property. But in very general, you should know that as an Oleh Hadash, for making Aliyah, you're entitled in most cases for a very big exemption to buy a residential property in Israel. So if it's 1 year before making Aliyah, or 3 years if it's a new apartment, or for the next 7 years from making Aliyah forward.
So just make Aliyah, contact the right people. And thank you, Moshe. It was really nice talking to you again.
You're welcome. Thank you, Maayan.